Hello and welcome to episode 22 of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we will be talking about the report of the Housing Commission, which has been leaked, which Ivan has been banging on about for ages. Now we finally get to talk about some of the things that are in it. We are going to talk about the UK general election, very surprisingly called by Rishi Sunak this week. Look at what might happen there and actually see as well if there perhaps may be things that we can take for an Irish election out of it. We're going to talk about the legacy of Tony O'Reilly, who died this week, a major figure in Irish public life, albeit from the private sector side, over the bulk of 50 to 60 years, one of the most powerful people in Ireland. Ivan was down at the Global Economic Forum in Killarney. He has learnt lots at it. And I have a little bit of gossip which might give an indication as to the date of our general election here in Ireland. But I want to start by talking about Ireland's decision to recognise the state of Palestine, doing so with Spain and Norway this week, adding to other countries, about 140 throughout the world, who have previously done so, although not the United States and not many of our EU partners. And this is the ethical and morally correct thing to do, and it speaks very much to our own history of having been oppressed and occupied. And it is not anti-Semitic to recognise the state of Palestine because it's part of a two-state solution that has been proposed previously. And yet I understand, Ivan, you have reservations about this.
I do. Well, first of all, just preempt my reservations by saying, we've discussed the Gaza situation, 35,000 dead Palestinians. I'm as anti-Israel as anyone. I feel there actually should be sanctions against Israel.
Sorry, anti-Israel government as it stands, perhaps.
Because absolutely.
I think there's a distinction that needs to be drawn here, because what really annoys me is that when you can criticise legitimately the actions of the current Israeli government in a genocide in Gaza, that is not anti-Semitic. You can still simultaneously believe in the right of Israel to exist and be very, very aware of the appalling wrongs done to the Jewish people in the Holocaust, and also the wrongs done to the Israeli people in the Hamas attack of October 7th, and not be in any way sympathetic to Hamas. And that's one of the things I thought was really irritating this week, the way the Israeli government reacted in that ridiculous video they put out and showed to other EU ambassadors, sort of mocking Ireland and saying that we were Hamas supporters and the rest of it. But sorry, go back to your point.
Well, my reservation is this. What does recognising a state, any state, mean? Does it mean recognising their government? Does it mean recognising their diplomatic service? What does it actually mean? And I think it's very hard to conclude that it doesn't mean recognising a government. And therefore you have, in the West Bank, you have Fatah and you have Mr. Abbas, and then in Gaza you have Hamas and their leaders. So I think it's just inescapable that what you're actually doing is recognizing Hamas as a legitimate government. Let me just also say, I just have an instant reservation about something that is they say done as a symbolic gesture. It's not, and that to me says it's gesture politics. It's gesture politics for consumption on the international stage. And I actually think that if you look at a way out of this, release of the hostages, permanent ceasefire, Israeli Defense Forces out of Gaza, and then a recognition of a two-state solution. All of that is being worked on by the 22-country Arab League behind the scenes, with the big players, the EU and the US. And here we do a solo run, which they're trying to put maximum pressure on the Netanyahu government, which are actually the rock on the road, because they keep coming back to the Israelis, say, how about this deal? And they keep saying no. So I actually think Netanyahu's own survival is the reason that he's taking such a hard line. And I think it's out of line with Israel's best interest and their government. So the bit I just find is this. Why haven't France, Germany, Belgium, Holland all done what Ireland has done? And that smacks to me of almost headline seeking.
Okay, I think a few things in relation to that. I think the reason those countries haven't done anything is because of their own guilt in relation to the Holocaust, and a belief that they actually have to support Israel almost no matter what. Secondly, in relation to the recognition of a government. We've never recognized governments. You recognize the state because governments can change within the state. But there was essentially a de facto recognition of the Palestinian Authority because Simon Harris spoke to Abbas this week, and also very, very strongly, which of course has been deliberately ignored by the Israeli government, condemned Hamas and its actions on October 7th and condemned its overall objectives and the rest of it. So it's the difficulty with it's not a difficulty, but the interesting thing about what the Irish government's position is effectively it wants the Israelis to return the lands it has seized since 1967. And that, of course, is going to be the most sensitive and difficult thing with all the settlements over there. The only reservation I would have, and it does a little bit tack into your thing about gesture politics, and perhaps redundant gestures can sometimes become damaging gestures. There's an enormous amount of goodwill towards Israel amongst many multinational corporations, particularly those in the tech sector, many of whom invest in Ireland. And we saw the reaction to that guy, Paddy Cosgrave, in the Web Summit when he tweeted in the aftermath of the initial Israeli response to October 7th, and he got slaughtered and he ended up stepping aside from his business for a while because many companies withdrew from the Web Summit, and he's now back in place and doing his thing as only he does his thing. That's not really of interest to us. But what is of interest is the potential for doing damage to our inward investment by the fact that many of these companies have senior figures in them who make investment decisions who are very sympathetic to Israel. And if we were then in a position where it's a 50-50 call between Ireland and somewhere else, maybe against Ireland because of this. So there could be unintended consequences.
But ultimately, my view is that the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which goes back to the 1967 borders, East Jerusalem, West Bank and Gaza, and a Palestine state for that, I think that is the ultimate long-term solution. And I think...
So effectively, you're recognising yourself the rights of the Palestinians.
Absolutely, but I think if there was an election in Gaza, Hamas would be the duly elected government.
Well, isn't that for those people, there are people to decide
so
for
therefore,
themselves.
recognising the state, is actually going to make matters more difficult. Like, put it like this, I think, let's be clear, Ireland is 1% of the EU population. It is not a big player on the world stage and will never be, right? So therefore, and Spain, okay, that's something of a player, but I would have thought our strength is in unity with the EU, and us breaking away from EU foreign policy, not that it's not permissible, but that I actually think there's something hollow about it.
Yeah, but hold on.
Gesture politics.
Spain have done the same as us, and there are something like another 10 countries within the EU who have already recognised Palestine already anyway. So, but just coming back, let's move on a little bit.
Yeah.
And your old hobby horse at the Housing Commission, because it's been a lot of interesting lines in it, a lot of which actually were not new, because it was only sort of like the common sense discussions we and others have been having for years now in relation to many of these issues. But actually, something that is very important to housing, which was mentioned in the report, which is also exceptionally important to getting inward investment, is the identification of something we have banged on about before, and that is the shortage of adequate water facilities, particularly for Dublin, and the electricity grid. This is becoming a major talking point for potential investors into the country. And if you add that to the fact they say, well, where are workers going to live and the rest of it, the economic miracle of the last decade, and it has been something of a miracle now that we've over 2.4 million people working in the country, could come to an abrupt end by self-harm, by our failure to actually get on with doing things like pumping water from the River Shannon over into Dublin, putting massive immediate investment into the grid for our electricity and putting up our wind farms and all those things. Those things are equally as important as actually building physical houses and apartments.
So I totally agree with that and have iterated that many times. Just to give you an overview of what I read, the leaked report. First of all, I think it's unfortunate. These people have done the best part of 3 years' work on this. And it's a bit shabby simply because the government wants to review its response to it, that the report was completed 2 or 3 weeks ago, that it wasn't published without comment from the government and let it be published. That it was leaked, I think it was a bit disrespectful to everybody. So in its 83 recommendations, what I think are the top line issues is, first of all, they have estimated between now and 2034, there is a deficit of somewhere between 212,000 houses and 256,000 houses. And they say if you have to pick a figure, they say 235. So let's talk about the money first of all. So they say the state is putting in 7 billion a year into housing. Private developers are putting in 6 billion a year. And this says that the cost of delivering that is between 16 and 20 billion a year. Ergo, there's a shortfall of finance, pick your own number, between 3 and 7 billion. Where is that money going to come from? They haven't said where it's going to come from. Now, putting figures on it is useful.
But, sorry, it's insinuated. And I think this is really interesting in the sense that this report has been something of a gift for the opposition, particularly with the government not formally publishing it and not coming out formally to defend it, its own record. Owen O'Brien has had almost the freedom of the airwaves, and Ivana Bacik for Labour has been pushing forward as well about failed government policies, and given what's there in black and white in the report, as we've seen of it, that's not hard to argue it. But there are lots of elements in it that when you dig into it, the implication is that we're going to need more private money.
Oh,
and that we're going to need more foreign international money. And that flies in the face of what the opposition parties are actually pushing, with that they seem to be pushing this idea that the state can solve all. And yet, in the very report, it makes it quite clear that we have one of the highest, actually, public investments in housing in the EU, and we get one of the worst returns for it. So how could put more money into the state's supply of housing actually work if we get such a poor return out of it?
So the money is the first thing. It doesn't say how that money, and it can only be international finance or government finance. The second point is, which I think is a really good point, they said, heretofore, the state's role has been focused on the homeless, social housing, people who can't. They're saying that policy needs to change to broaden people on middle incomes and lower who would need affordable houses. And the truth of it is that if you take something like Croí Cónaithe, which is how can we build these apartments if they're not viable only at 400 grand and people can't afford that, Croí Cónaithe is a subsidy on the apartments. So it actually opens the door to say that all this middle income cohort that are, the affordability gap is too great to get a home of their own, first-time home buyers, that deliberate policy should be, on one hand, social and on the other hand, affordable. Whereas so far, the policies for affordable are a little bit token. They just haven't had huge traction of numbers. There's some local authorities have no affordable scheme, 2 years after Housing for All was published. The other thing that I was disappointed about, look, the planning system will not build you 250,000 houses. It just won't build it to you. And it talks about, planning things. I mean, I thought they had the opportunity to say, we'll do what Britain does, first party appeals only. So third party, you can have one go to object. You can't go to the High Court. You can't go to Bord Pleanála. And basically, that would be a real game changer. They did not specify what emergency planning laws would be put in place, and they kind of genuflected to the planning bill, which most developers tell me will not solve these problems of judicial reviews and other things. And while they called out the Clonshock drainage report and the River Shannon that you alluded to, I thought the language could have been more dramatic. But and the other thing that I thought was really interesting, another gesture politics. One of the things they were mandated to do was to come up with a wording for a housing referendum. And they couldn't agree on this. And there was a minority report came up with a wording. This is more symbolic gesture politics. I mean, if you have a constitutional provision and even a right to housing, is that actually going to clear the roadblocks of drainage, planning, all those things? It's not. And it's just actually more tokenism. So I actually think a referendum is a complete waste of time.
And something else that struck me that, I don't know if you maybe do the figures on this, but in the Dáil this week, Owen O'Brien and Mary Lou MacDonald hammered the government for what they said was 10 billion wasted over the last 10 years on HAP, the housing assistance payments and other payments to people who can't afford the rents in the private sector. So they get a subsidy or top up from the state to allow them to rent. And the implication of what O'Brien and MacDonald were hammering at the government about was that this was money that could have instead have been used for construction of social housing. Except 10 billion would not have actually built enough social housing to house all of these people. That it's going to take, you're always going to have some people who are going to need some sort of assistance, even if it's a bridge temporarily for a number of years. And if the government hadn't spent that 10 billion on HAP over the last decade, how many homeless people would we have? I mean, you can't have it both ways. And the other thing I thought was interesting as well is that, the rent pressure zones have been extended now by the government until December 2025, which is purely a political gesture because they don't want to admit that they don't work. But effectively, what the opposition is saying, the rent pressure zones don't work. We want to put in rent controls, which are more or less the same thing.
So, yeah, absolutely. No, these are people. The gap between the market rate of rent and what people can afford. If you don't have HAP, they say to combine the rent supplement and HAP into one single scheme, which makes sense. The controversial one that Darragh O'Brien's been out of trap saying he won't accept is the new body, Housing Delivery Oversight Executive. Folks, do not get your knickers in a knot. The housing agency that Bob Jordan run actually does that. It's actually got the land bank from local authorities. It's now developing it and so on. Just call the housing agency this new executive and give it a few more powers. There is a need for delivery. Some of the things about zones are interesting. A new social housing act. But one thing I'm delighted about. It has called out one of the things, like why has Fine Gael's record of 13 years not achieved housing? And I think it was Ian Guider sent me a text recently about this. This report calls this out, that in the bowels of the Department of Public Expenditure Reform, in the bowels of the Department of Finance, their instinct is we do not want another oversupply situation. We don't want to fuel housing expenditure, so we have the ghost estates again. And deep down, I'd say they believe if we have these numbers, 60,000 a year, we're heading for another property bubble and so on. And the hidden hand of the Department of Finance has stymied every scheme. Because, if you look at Project Tossig, Creek Conaha, first-time home buyer scheme, all these schemes, they announced there's going to be 10,000 of this, and then they find that 400 participate, and they put so many terms and conditions and red tape on it by the Department of Finance, they have stultified it.
Well, I was just to ask, has everything become overly complicated in the sense that do we actually need, on a more simple basis, put the infrastructure in place and allow cheap connections for public or private housing and into the water and the electricity, that there's a greater good by doing all of that, make the land available cheaper. I mean, I've said to you before on this podcast as well, you look at the reports the likes of the Land Development Agency does, there's plenty of it. There's no shortage of land. There is no shortage of serviced land, but there's an enormous amount of vested interests which are determined to hold on to the land for their own use rather than let it go in for housing.
You do know they did a study of unused land that was vacant.
Oh, yeah.
And the top 12, 11 of the top 12, it was state organisations were hoarding the land.
And
isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
because this vision of private developers hoarding the land, actually they only make their money when they actually convert development land into houses. So I'm looking forward to the publication of it. I think it does allow a context for the next government to do a reset.
Because the other thing is, and I know people have been taking issue with me online in relation to, I've said that housing is the biggest issue and the people are jumping, it's immigration. And I know there's a new poll, I think the Irish Independent this week, suggesting now that immigration has gone to the very top of concerns for people before the European local elections. However, if we didn't have a serious housing issue, I'd argue we wouldn't have the immigration issue.
They overlap, actually.
They absolutely overlap. And actually, the thing is, if you actually solve the housing issue, which obviously you can't do overnight, and this is something that more attention should have been paid to over the last decade, and some of us were banging on about it a lot over the last decade, but if you actually were to miraculously overnight solve the housing issue, the immigration issue would dramatically contract, and the only people who would be left complaining are those numbers who are racist. And, we have people within us who like to say, I'm not racist, I'm just concerned about that. Actually, You scratch beneath the surface. They're racist. They just don't like foreign people living in this country, particularly foreign people who are not white, although they've now managed to increase their racism to xenophobia against Ukrainians. There's a lot of people. And the same way that I have to say, I mean, I don't agree with Israel trying to label us all in Ireland as anti-Semitic because we have our legitimate belief in the right of Palestine to exist and believe that what Israel is doing in Palestine at the moment is wrong. However, there are individuals, there are elements who are motivated by anti-Semitism. They would never admit to it formally, but deep down, again, you scratch the surface, just like you have many racists, you do have anti-Semites in Ireland, and that historically has been the case, and there are plenty of examples of it amongst the left and right over the last century and a bit.
That overlap is actually, you know, if you talk to people, what's your problem with immigrants? Is it that you get on the dart and nobody speaks English? What is your issue about it? And what they feel is their sons and daughters are sofa surfing at home and so on. And they feel maybe the prospects of native people, for want of a better word, indigenous people, to get houses is being limited by other people coming in. But when you look at it in the round with staff shortages and so on, that is probably not sustainable. But what I'm hoping...
The amount of important jobs that are being filled in our hospitals, in particular in our nursing homes by people from, and also our
and
tech
hospitality.
Hospitality.
Yeah.
The tech companies. I mean, there simply aren't enough Irish people with the necessary skills. So you actually have to have multinational hubs, effectively, for the tech companies who are providing the enormous taxes, the corporation taxes, which are put to use to keep running the state. But it's far more complicated than a lot of these racists would actually agree to.
You just picked up on the opposition making hay. Did you hear, because you'd be following this with The Last Word and so on as a busy journalist, did you hear from any of them their solution? I mean, like, we all know the problem is dire. We all know the deficit of housing. But have you heard a solution?
Well, not really. But what I think there's almost a naive belief that they can reform delivery by the state. That there's almost like if Owen O'Brien was to become housing minister, that he would crack heads in the Department of Housing and amongst the various councils and the LDA, and suddenly the state would magically start delivering what it hasn't been delivering. And good luck to him in that, I have to say, because there is no evidence to suggest that the state has the record or the will to actually get on and do what needs to be done in relation to the delivery of housing.
And for me, the biggest roadblock, first is money and second is planning. I'm not hearing from Sinn Féin that they favour a diminution of rights of objectors. Like, you know, I came across another case last week, one couple holding up a whole block of apartments that are desperately needed in a brownfield site.
Sorry, politicians are amongst those who most avidly object. Sinn Féin TDs have mounted many objections to various housing developments in recent times, but you can't just single out Sinn Féin. When he was Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar was objecting to things in his own constituency.
I think where it'll all come down to is that Housing for All will be seen to be a kind of 1 litre engine and we need a 3 litre engine. And I think that is where the ground will shift onto, and the Commission therefore... And when you get a state body saying it, as opposed to you or I saying it, I think it will facilitate a complete reset.
Let's talk a little bit about the British calling a general election. Rishi Sunak, is he off his head? He gets reasonably good inflation figures. And we'll go and have a general election, as if that's going to persuade the voters of Britain after, 14 years of Tory rule, that they need another 5 years of it?
I think he's gone for the least worst option from his point of view. He's facing a situation that in the polls, Labour has a 20-point lead. It had a 27-point lead. So the retirements plus the polls mean we are staring in the face of a Labour landslide. I actually think, you know, this is probably to do with two things. One, the Rwanda flights are not going to take off between now and the autumn, whereas he can let on they're going to take off between now and the autumn, and he would have been found out on that. And secondly, there's such internal divisions in the Tory party after the local election fallout that they were probably going to come gunning for him, and it would have been messy even if he survived. And I think he took the option. The sun is going to shine. Europe, the Euros are on.
England might win.
Exactly. The Three Lions are going to do well, and and he might get some bounce out of it. But put it like this, I think he's absolutely realistic about the fact that we're not talking about optimal solutions here. It's the least worst.
Least worst option. Okay, the symbolism of him standing outside 10 Downing Street.
Getting soaked
In the rain, forecasting that things were going to get better, with Dee Ream being played off a loudspeaker, that song, the Tony Blair Labour anthem from the 97 election, blasting along behind him. Why they couldn't have sent him out with an umbrella, why they couldn't have delayed a little bit for the rain to pass, just shows that, well, planning may not be a great thing within that particular administration.
The 4th of July, first of all, that's almost 6 weeks away. The maximum period an Irish election is 28 days. So we're going to be black sick of it by the time it comes. But I think he's deliberately gone for the longest possible election to try and flush out Labour's economic policies. And I was watching Question Time last night on BBC Two, and the shadow education spokesperson for Labour was there. And when asked specific questions, how are you going to fund universities? What are you going to do? It was pretty vacuous. And insofar as, like, okay, they're entitled to wait till their manifesto is published, but I certainly think the scrutiny that will come on Labour will narrow the gap, but I don't think there are any circumstances there's a fifth term. I'd like to take a little bit of a deep dive into Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Well, I would too, but just before we get to that, I think what's going to be very interesting for the Irish opposition parties to watch in the UK election campaign is how much do they actually have to promise as to what they will do, rather than just concentrating on undermining what the government in place has done. If you get what I mean, that, you know, it can be quite easy, as you've already said in relation to the Housing Commission, to say, here's an abject failure on the part of the government. It's proven by the Housing Commission. This is terrible. We do it better. But then the question is, how would you do it better? And I wonder how much that will play out in the results in the UK election. I suspect that the Tories are just done for. There's just so much ill will towards them, and the messing that has gone on and the constant changes of leadership. And now the Keir Starmer just has to play, to use a cricket metaphor, a straight bat, and not overpromise or not make a sort of Neil Kinnock style declarations of victory in advance. Steady Eddie, he'll get there probably. And then that will be informative, particularly to Sinn Féin, I think, and the other political parties in the opposition here in Ireland, as to what they do in a general election.
I think he's just got to say one thing. I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. And I don't know if you saw, it's announced last night that Jeremy Corbyn's going to run as an independent. Manna from heaven for the Labour Party. Yeah. We have purged ourselves of this hardcore left-wing ideology, and we are now back where Blair was in the middle ground. Elect us. I think that's the bar. The bar is that low for him. But just let's look at Northern Ireland for a moment. So we'll go into this election from the last year election, the DUP on 8, Sinn Féin on 7. Now, when it came to the local elections, Sinn Féin became the largest party. The DUP have a couple of problems. Firstly,
there's one called Jeffrey Donaldson.
Yes, Lagan Valley.
I don't know if there's a couple of problems. It's Jeffrey Donaldson.
Yes, no. Well, Lagan Valley. That Lagan Valley seat is in real jeopardy. Then you have the new leader of the DUP, Gavin Robinson, in East Belfast. A very interesting situation. Naomi Long, the leader of the alliance, ran him very close the last time. Now, if she's Justice Minister in the devolved administration.
In the Assembly,
so
the executive.
If she steps out of that and stands against him, and does that, I think she'll do for him. So he will be the shortest serving DUP leader ever.
Is that actually a good thing for Alliance, to have their main person in the Assembly and the executive step out of it to move to Westminster? Is Alliance better served by being in
That's the tactical consideration. And the third seat, so East Belfast, Lagan Valley and South Antrim, where Robin Swan has manoeuvred himself. He was the health minister previously during COVID, and as the health minister again. He is stepping down from that to stand for the UUP. And I think he will get that seat. And so when you look at it, the DUP could go down to 5, and Sinn Féin are looking to take Colm Eastwood's seat in Foyle Derry. But even if Sinn Féin stay on 7, I think they're going to be the largest party. So I think that's actually quite interesting.
Well, Scotland is fascinating because the problems that the Scottish Nationalist Party have had in recent weeks, new leader John Sweeney, scandal attaching to the party. And that actually struck me as very interesting, as Rishi Sunak. I mean, okay, the seats in Scotland aren't going to make an enormous difference, but they can make a difference. They have made a difference in the past in tight parliaments. Because is he actually essentially, at a time of great SNP weakness, handing maybe dozens of seats to Labour to help them in their move towards winning an overall majority.
This is vital for Starmer to be Prime Minister on the 5th of July. So there's a total of 59 MPs in Scotland, and at the moment, Labour only have 2 of those. The SNP have 43. So as you rightly said, you have proceedings and difficulties for Nicola Sturgeon and her husband. They're broke as a party. Humza Yousaf has stepped down over a row with the Greens, and this John Swinney is more than the school holidays. Because the school holidays come earlier in Scotland. He's saying, this is a disgrace, to pick a date. It's a disgrace because the SNP, with their 43 seats, are in real jeopardy of not even being the largest party. So if Labour can say get 35 seats, then absolutely he is going to win. All he's got to do is get the blue wall replaced by a red wall, and he wins. So to me, Scotland is absolutely pivotal, and Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader in Scotland, is actually very popular.
Something you said as well there about the 6-week run, and it'll bore everyone to death. I mean, I wonder, are they trying to actually deliberately bore people to death to get a lower turnout? Get committed. Yeah. Because one thing, looking at the BBC coverage, particularly on Wednesday night, and ITV coverage as well, the amount of, they do, I loathe Vox Pops. I just will not put them on the last word. I just think it's...
You loathe them or love them?
Loathe them. Okay. I will not allow them on under any circumstances.
They're beneath your intellectual standard that you hope to set on the programme.
Yeah, and especially when...
Any dumbing down is reprehensible, isn't it?
Well, apart from doing a podcast with you, yeah. Anyway, what struck me in watching...
Don't go near ordinary people, for God's sake. Yeah, carry on.
Anyway, what struck me was all of these so-called ordinary people. The politicians do nothing for me. I'm not going to vote. It was almost the deliberate ignorance and the sort of thing, it doesn't make any difference to my life and the rest of it, which hopefully we don't have that degree of nihilism here in Ireland. But you do sort of wonder a little bit about, that sort of reactionary approach to politics that's taken rather than action. And I just wonder over 6 weeks, as they have their discussions and have their rows, whether they will bore everybody to death. Anyway, I have a little bit of news for you about our general election.
Okay, just to say, if you think that we're completely wrong, there won't be a Labour landslide, you can get odds of 25 to 1 that Sunak will be Prime Minister after the 5th of July.
Okay. I'm now starting to think our general election 1st of November or possibly even the last week in October, and I'll tell you why. I've heard that quietly the Department of Finance has told some of the bodies that make pre-budget submissions to get them in a few weeks earlier than is normally the case.
Yeah.
And I think the budget, which was slated for around the 7th of October, around that date.
Tuesday the 8th,
Tuesday the 8th, that's it. Will now be a number of weeks earlier to give them time to get the measures through the Dáil before they go and call the general election. So I think we're heading for a September budget, late October, early November.
And can I ask
election.
you, is that from a combined FFFG Green, or is it from one particular party you're hearing?
Well, I put it this way, it must be the way Fianna Fáil are thinking, because it was the Department of Finance has been telling people quietly to get their submissions in weeks earlier.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Harris yesterday, and he said the election will be in 2025, and I thought, right, because that's not true.
Until it isn't in 2025.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that all of that is almost set in stone. I do sense, because I was looking at the figures for the local elections last time in 29. There could be a bit of real trouble. Like, just to give you these figures, so Fianna Fáil elected 279 councillors on 26.9% of the vote, 27. They're running 365 candidates. I can't see them breaking 200 councillors. I think they're going to drop at least 80 councillors. Fine Gael...
Sorry, what will then be the media sort of reaction to that? I mean, okay, will they be benchmarked against that 26.9% in the previous, or benchmarked against the opinion poll findings, which have them at around 15 to 18% all the time?
Well, whatever way you go, they're well short of 27%.
Absolutely.
Which got them that 365. So there's 365 candidates going into it.
So the narrative will be Fianna Fáil loses loads of councillors.
You know those charts that are put up below the line and above the line? You're going to see.
And how much unrest will there then be?
Well, I actually think, because what happens then is TDs and senators say, sweet Jesus, I'm next. You know what I mean? And nothing focused your mind like a hanging. And so therefore, Fine Gael, same thing. They have 255 councillors on 25% of the vote. I cannot see them getting much more than 20. And they have 339 candidates going into it. And the other one then is Sinn Féin, who got 9.5% vote, 81 councillors. They have 335 candidates.
So they can only go up. This is the remarkable thing about Sinn Féin as well. They can only get a major increase in the number of councillors that they have. And they will be claiming that as a great success. Again, how deeply will people look into the fact, well, you only had 9.5% of the vote in the last local elections. So yes, if you double or treble that vote, obviously you're going to get an enormous amount. But the key number for me in relation to Sinn Féin to watch is 25%.
Yeah, but that's the general election figure.
Absolutely, 24.5%.
Yeah.
But
I don't think they'll get that this time because
of the independence.
But really where the breakthrough is for Sinn Féin is these poll-topping councillors, even if there's only 200 of them, right, their biggest problem is candidates. And they're now going to sort that out, I think, with local elections. So what I'm just saying is this, there could be such a visceral deflation of confidence in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil that they might just try and hide from a general election.
Did you notice some of the polls on the European Parliament constituencies?
Yeah.
And how difficult it is, it seems, for almost any candidate to break 15% of there's such enormously long lists.
Yeah.
It's going to take days to count the votes. But some of those people that you've been hyping up a little bit, they're only polling at less than 5%.
Well, okay. We shall see. Insofar as that, I think there's also the potential in this, like the referendums, for the polls to be underestimating certain things, because I don't think people necessarily tell the truth to someone with a clipboard.
Well, then if that's the case, I mean, her polls completely in disrepute. Maybe we should have a conversation about that just prior to the elections, which are only 2 weeks away now at this stage. Look, can I talk a little bit, and then I'd be interested to hear your take as well, on the late Tony O'Reilly. And just to sort of put a little bit of context and background here, I would have known Tony O'Reilly from, first of all, having interviewed him as a journalist. And then I became business editor of the Irish Independent at the start of 1993. Worked there until September 96, when I was appointed editor of the Sunday Tribune, which was controlled at the time by O'Reilly's independent newspapers, and spent 6 and a bit years there before I quit to go to my current job on the last word of Today FM. So I would have known O'Reilly over that time. I would have been at various company meetings, annual general meetings, and indeed I would have been at many of the functions that he used to hold down at his house in Castlemartin. I would have been at various lunches in Fitzwilliam Square when he would have brought in the likes of Bill Clinton, Nelson Mandela, Henry Kissinger, people like that. So I had all of that knowledge over a period of time. And then I wrote an unauthorized biography of him in 2015 called The Maximalist. So I've been very interested in who I think he's been one of the most interesting people that this country has ever produced. If you go back to him as a sports star originally, then you look at what he did in the Irish food sector before he moved on to the United States, and was a real trailblazer for Irish business people and going to the United States and becoming the boss of Heinz, a major American food company, and how he continued to invest enormous sums of money in Ireland across a variety of assets. And then, of course, having been, as he believed, a bona fide billionaire in 2008, was bankrupted by your old friends in AIB, who did him over a debt which he claimed he would be able to meet, and they pulled the plug and left him in the ignominy of facing bankruptcy. But I suppose what I want to talk to you about in this podcast is his interaction with the political process, because in going back and rereading The Maximalist, I came across two major issues. One when you were in government, and I'll get to that in a moment. The first one, though, was the 1980s, and you probably remember this as a backbencher, and all the fuss about oil in the Irish Sea and Atlantic Resources hunting for oil, and he couldn't get the terms that he wanted from Dick Spring in particular. And Gareth Fitzgerald ended up believing that that government was badly treated by the independent titles because of O'Reilly's belief that he wasn't getting the deal he wanted. Now, other people said, well, actually, the government wasn't doing particularly well and was very unpopular, so it was quite obvious that the newspapers would go after it. On that period, before we get to the 90s, what did you think?
Well, first of all, before I worked with you on The Tonight Show, I asked me, what's this Matt Cooper guy like? And you know what everyone said to me? Tony O'Reilly made Matt Cooper. He was his fair-haired boy. He plucked him from obscurity, making business editor, made him the youngest editor newspaper of a Sunday Tribune in the country. Now, whether that's true or not, that is the thing. So I can understand why it is a mastermind subject for you. And I was listening to you with Anton at the weekend. I thought you were very fair. But I would say that you probably have a little bit of a rose-tinted view on him.
If you read the book, I think you'd say it's all balanced out. Funny enough,
you didn't knock the manure out of him now, did you?
No, because he just died. And so, like, I have a certain...
No, I meant in the book. In the book.
No, well, did you read it?
No, but I got enough pages. I got enough pages of it.
Anyway, actually, funny you mentioned that, and I suppose I can't say this now, but he didn't want me to be the business editor of the Irish Independent. He was livid when Vinnie Doyle, the editor of the Independent, hired me for the job. So much so, a little side story in this. I was brought to Tony O'Reilly Jr., his son, asked me a couple of weeks before Christmas in 1992. I was serving up my notice at the Business Post to go to this new job. And Tony O'Reilly Jr., who I knew a little bit at the time, asked me to come to an event for his company, Archon, which O'Reilly Sr. was going to be at. And at it, O'Reilly Sr. came over to me and said, "Oh, I hear you're going to be my new business editor." And then proceeded to go through me for a shortcut, right? And he could remember stuff I had written a couple of years earlier about the Waterford-Wedgwood strike or the Waterford-Crystal strike.
So you amended your ways, did you?
No, let me tell you the story, right? Let me tell you the story in this. Just bear with me, right? So anyway, he's having a real go at me. And I actually am thinking, well, I'm not going to this job. I'm going back to rescind my resignation if the Business Post, because he could remember the stuff I'd written better than I could. And that was part of his prestigious memory. Next thing that I could see in the corner of my eye, his best mate, a fellow called Jim McCarthy, was watching. Next thing, Jim sidled over and goes, "Tony, excuse me." He just stopped and said, "Tony, Matt," he said, "can I ask you, are you Matty Cooper's son?" "I am, yeah." And next thing, Jim McCarthy says to Tony, "Do you not remember Matty, Tony?" Now, my father had never met Tony O'Reilly. And Tony O'Reilly had never met my father. But Jim McCarthy had grown up just down the road from my father and knew him. And he said, "Do you not remember Matty at Sundays well?" And O'Reilly had played with Dolphin. "Ah, you must." Now, O'Reilly was completely thrown, right? Because he remembered everything and everyone. And Jim had thrown him a dodgy pass. And the next thing was going, "Do you play rugby?" "I used to," blah, blah. And the next thing, suddenly all the air diffused out of the bomb.
Okay.
And I said, he did not want me. So just let me put it like that, right?
Okay, you got it on merit. I get it. Okay. The point I just talk briefly some interactions I had with them.
Yeah.
And that whole period in the 80s, there was issues with Dick Spring and all that, but to be honest with you, I was a backbencher. I didn't have a ringside seat to that, but I very much had a ringside seat in the 90s. And so basically, I went down to Castlemartin to meet him at his request, and he said,
"Was this when you were Minister for Agriculture?"
Yes, exactly. Okay. And he said, "Look, we're going to build this Heinz plant in Dundalk," and we were looking for grant. And actually, the second thing was the night before the Derby. And it was actually the opening of the Strawberry Fair in Enniscorthy, which I had to be at, that he would have this big midsummer's party in Castlemar, and I would go to that. And I actually
I don't remember meeting you at any of those.
Well, I was there, and the point about it is this: the other couple of interactions I have with them, Wexford Opera. Wexford Opera would not be there today but for the support independent newspapers, and he personally gave it to it. I have never met a man to come into a room, and other than Haughey would be the other one, who had such presence. Everyone would either stand up or genuflect to him. He was a brilliant raconteur.
He was charismatic.
He was charismatic, and there's no question about that. But I would say, when I read parts of your book about Princess Holdings and these illegal deflectors,
let's just
MMDS,
remind people, because back in the 1990s, it wasn't possible to get television in large parts of the country. In fact, where I grew up, we didn't have actual, apart from RT1, RT2, you could only get multi-channel if you bought off a particular system. And O'Reilly invested heavily in this MMDS, as it was called, at the urgings, I think,
which
of
was
Ray
multi-channel facility for TV.
Had been at the urgings of Ray Burke when he was the minister thing. And during the mid-1990s, the business was losing loads of money because all around the country, there were locals set up these cheaper but unlicensed and illegal deflector systems. And O'Reilly's belief was that the Fine Gael government, or the Fine Gael Rainbow government, wasn't enforcing the law. and that he and his partners in the United States were losing loads of money
because of it.
If
people were watching BBC and ITV and telling them through this relay system that was illegal that they were going to lose that, because he was mostly cable. But can I say this, that my clearest memory was, he said to me, he said, Ivan, I get on great with you, but he said, I wish I could say the same for your Rainbow colleagues. And he gave me chapter and verse on a spat he had with Richard Bruton about the Irish Press Group and however that was handled. And he was vitriolic about it. So there
was a Competition Authority investigation. Patrick Massey, I think, was the guy who ran that, or Patrick Lyons it was. I think the two of them might have been involved. And he was livid about the finding about a dominant position of Independent in the market, arguing that it wasn't taking into account News International and various other foreign players and the impact of other media on the print industry.
So the second thing which I got from your book that he was livid about was Dennis O'Brien winning the mobile phone licence from AT&T and Lowry's role on that.
Not quite O'Brien's winning of it, but it was the way that Lowry handled it.
Yeah.
And again, I have a personal thing here in the sense that I do remember in 1995, the opening of the Galmoy mine, and I was actually at it. And Lowry that day as the minister
he was a big proponent of Galmoy mine.
Yeah,
yes.
well, and Phil Hogan was as well. I remember Phil was at the table beside me down there at the lunch beforehand. And Lowry came over to me, and it was one of the most amusing conversations, which I can't go into detail with because he insisted at the time it was off the record. But all I'll say is that Sam Smith had written another great Michael Lowry story that very morning for the Irish Independent.
That was the beginning of the end for Lowry.
This is even before the Ben Dunn stuff. Sam and myself had worked together on quite a few Michael Lowry stories even then.
You and Lowry would be very close, wouldn't that be?
Lowry, we had our conversation and Lowry left. But I ran into O'Reilly not long afterwards. He's seen me with Lowry, and he was absolutely livid. And he said, and this even though I was a bit taken aback, because normally, a big day out and he'd be happy out. And he said that Lowry had said to him that your boys were in for the mobile phone license application and they didn't do well. They didn't do it.
And he referred to yesterday it happened. It was almost as if he was in the room.
And he was supposed to be, the phrase was hermetically sealed. And O'Reilly was like, what the hell? AT&T were in part of that consortium and they didn't know what they were talking about. They gave a bad
At the tribunal, Lowry denied that. There is, but anyway.
But I tell you this much, I know who I believe between Tony O'Reilly and Michael Lowry.
So can I just...
But sorry, and the reason I say that is because, I remember on that very day, O'Reilly said it to me. So it wasn't a question of me, many years later, what they said, he said in a tribunal nearly a decade later. I remember it being said to me on that particular day.
So, Kerrygold, his career with Heinz.
But hold on. Before you got to Kerrygold and Heinz, then you got to 1997 and the editorial.
Yeah, payback time.
We have been bled dry for years.
I was going to come to this. I'm going to give you the positives and I'm going to give you the negatives. Okay. So the positives are iconic entrepreneur, Fitzwilton, Heinz, Waterford Wedgwood. We could talk for an hour about it. But his rugby prowess and all of this. And just want to correct one thing. AIB only took personal bankruptcy proceedings against two people, and they were Ivan Yates and Deirdre Yates. What actually happened was Bernard Summers put together a package of 31 creditors and they vetoed it. And that forced him in Bermuda to go into bankruptcy, but they didn't take bankruptcy proceedings against him because that's a particular badge of honour I have.
I understand. So what he did was it was coming, he knew it was coming, so he literally started the proceedings in the Bahamas.
They actually tried to do a deal and AIB vetoed it. Every other bank agreed. So...
and you probably will like me saying this as well. The one thing that's been very clear this week, and was very clear around the time, was an awful lot of people felt that AIB behaved very, very badly towards him. That AIB had been in receipt of over 20 billion euro in rescue money because of the mistakes it made. And given O'Reilly's track record and what he had contributed to the country on what was overall a relatively small sum of money, most of which could have been recovered, forcing him into bankruptcy was an ignominious end that he didn't deserve. That's what many people would believe.
And so, having made all those positive points, I think there are two sides to Tony O'Reilly that any fair person would have to say. That he has an ego the size of Croke Park.
Absolutely.
And was a bit vain. And secondly, he was a bully. If you did not cooperate, whether you're a government or anything else, and that led to the situation of what I thought was absolutely disgraceful, a front page editorial in 1997 saying, get this government out. And actually it was quite close between Bertie at that time and the Rainbow being re-elected and his role in that. But put it like just two
but
little...
sorry, how much do you think did it matter? And because I mean, we've discussed previously that 97 election campaign, the impact of Charlie Bird following Bertie Ahern around the place for the television coverage, and Joe O'Brien been with John Bruton. So,
there's lots of factors.
Do you think people really make up their mind how to vote based on an editorial?
But what was his intent?
What
was his intent?
He always denied any involvement, and Vinnie Doyle always said it was his own decision to write.
Of course. So the other thing I would say, Kingsley Aikens is a friend of mine, and the Ireland Fund. Yeah. He tells a great story how they first met in Australia and all that. But what he did with the Ireland Fund was absolutely outstanding. The other friend of mine,
just say, set up with Dan Rooney in the 1970s, and the aspiration here was they were worried about the amount of money that NORAID was raising for the IRA in the United States, and decided it would be better to get more money in the United States from legitimate sources that could be put into cross-border and cross-community projects across the island. And it has raised hundreds and hundreds of millions.
And the final thing I want to say, because I want to leave a little time for the global economics, Barry Brennan is a friend of mine, and he worked as a senior executive in independent newspapers. And he'd say whenever there was a crisis, and, there was a shit show, money was lost on something, he'd ring him on a Sunday, he'd ring Barry, and he said, now remember this, whatever you're going to say, facts are friendly. And he had this thing, which I'd say he was a hard man to work for.
Yeah, funny enough, I was down at a UCC food conference this week, and I did, because we lost somebody who was supposed to be presenting was ill. So Joe Gill and myself decided instead to do a thing about O'Reilly in the food industry, because it was a food conference. So I ran through his setting up of Kerrygold as Borbonia, which, lots of people were involved on, including Gareth Fitzgerald did a lot of the background work in relation to that. And there was an ad agency who came up with the slogans, everyone loves, claiming part of success. But you know what? If O'Reilly hadn't been there, the sort of dynamic figure pushing it through, that never would have happened. And Kerrygold remains an enormously successful brand for Ireland ever since. And indeed, actually, it wasn't wrapped in the gold wrapping as we now all see Kerrygold. That actually came later. It was initially see-through parchment paper, just a small point. But anyway, that, and then he went to Irish Sugar, and then he went into Heinz. But he had this phrase when you said yes, he said, facts are friendly. Tell me the good facts, tell me the bad facts, tell me all the facts, and then you can actually make your decisions based on
that. And if you didn't tell him the facts, you'd be done for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I because we've only a few moments left, I was down in Killarney for this Global Economic Summit, organised by your paper, the Business Post, one of your many papers, and 74 speakers, an inaugural event, very difficult to do. C-level people from Verizon, Veolia, right through. Accenture sponsored it. Google were there. I learned so many things. Like there was top politicians, New York state governor, EU commissioners, and so on. And I learned a couple of things that I thought were very interesting. The cost of the Green Deal is 500 billion investment per annum. The Common Agricultural Policy is 57 billion per annum. And my question is that doable? Secondly, one of the things, because I didn't know much about AI, this guy, Gopi Khalil, did all these examples. So he got
He's from Google, wasn't he?
Yeah. He got this phone and he said, what are you seeing now? And it would say, I'm seeing a bottle of water here. And then they asked, and where did I leave my glasses? Oh, I looked at that 10 minutes ago. They're on the drawer or whatever. And they are now doing this predictive stuff they can do from drone technology and satellite technology, predicting floods of rivers. Radiologists, there's 20,000 radiologists in India. It will do the work of 200,000 radiologists in interpreting X-rays. And the absolute potential for this, and people said that, the way the internet has changed everyone's life, shopping online, working from home and so on, all of those factors, this is going to have a bigger impact than the online world, the internet.
All for the positive?
We'll put it like this. He said there's no such thing as bad technology, only bad actors. So
there's
therefore,
plenty of bad
autonomous weapons, that there won't be body bags anymore. All the AI will fight all the wars and so on. So then the second thing I learned, which was, because there's a whole section on healthcare, I got a cure for cancer. So what we've done with cancer is we cut it out, surgery,
Yeah.
we poison it out, chemotherapy, or we burn it out through radium treatment. The future is immunotherapy to melt the cancer. And that actually we all from early age get little cancers that we don't know about as a big thing, and that this will be a game changer to cure cancer. I thought that was impressive.
Yeah, that's a great way to finish. That's a really positive way to finish.
The other thing is, if you don't believe all the sustainability stuff, in 1950, the world population was 2.5 billion.
Yeah.
Today it's 8 billion.
Yeah.
In 2050, 100 years later, it will be 4 times that. It'll be 10 billion. Go figure. All that consumption, all that production, actually the planet being in trouble is not a surprise.
Yeah, funny enough, that was one of the things at the food conference. I was doing the UCC Food and Beverages Finance Conference. We were talking about all the ways that we'll need, all the things that will be needed done to feed the world for years to come. Okay, that's it. We've gone a little bit over. Hope you've stuck with us. And if you did like it and enjoy it, please recommend to a friend on Spotify, on Apple, wherever it is that you get your podcasts, or YouTube as well. If you're stuck looking at us for the last hour, you can recommend to somebody else as well. So we'll be back next week, which will be,
the last week before polling day.
Before polling day. Well, we'll do a podcast as well on polling day.
Yes, we will.
Because we're not bound by the broadcasting rules.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's all to come from me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for being with us.